Hello Fearseekers, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, demon horror stories. I'd just like to take a moment to let you all know that as of this week, we are officially part of the YouTube Partner Program. Thank you all so much for helping me reach this milestone, and I look forward to reaching many more with you. Now without further ado, sit back, put any idea of sleep away, and get ready to ferment your fears. I grew up in a haunted demonic house in Brisbane, Australia. It's been abandoned since we moved out. I don't often talk about it because it's definitely scarred me and just thinking about it freaks me out. But here we go. I was about 9 years old. I'm now 27, and my parents decided to move out of a small apartment complex and start running a house together in Brisbane. We couldn't afford much, so it was a cheap and very old-looking house. Nothing major my dad couldn't fix up, he thought. Keep in mind, the owner of the property lived in another state, so it was hard to get into contact with him. Upon moving in, there were red flags right from the get-go. When we moved in, there was a big gross and tacky-looking rug in the kitchen with weird, old, blood-looking stains. Nope, that's gotta go, we thought. We rolled it up and chucked it out. The property had a big backyard of acreage, so there were lots of trees. For some reason, upside-down horseshoes were nailed on some of the trees, and there was even one in the kitchen. Again, we thought, nope, too weird and creepy. That's going. Years later, after looking more into it, we found out that hanging upside-down horseshoes were meant for good luck and to get rid of negative energy, but we didn't realize this at the time. After taking them down, we went through many years of bad luck throughout our time living in that house. At first, apart from the house looking creepy and old, there were no physical signs of anything paranormal. But as a kid, I loved playing outdoors. I was a big tomboy, especially having a big acreage of land in our backyard. But soon enough, being a kid that plays in the dirt, I started to find things under the dirt. I found clothing buried in random parts of the property. My mom would occasionally see little bits of cloth sticking out of the dirt too. Being curious, we dug them out, and it was always clothing of a woman or a child. Sometimes even the odd shoe here and there. My parents didn't seem to care too much, and my dad was a skeptic. They always had some excuse for why stuff was there. My house was lifted from the ground so I could go under the house and play. One day, I found a bone buried under there. This is when my mom realized there were too many coincidences and told my dad. She wanted to report it to the police, but my dad just said, "Don't waste your time, it's most likely old cattle bones." So we listened to my dad. Soon enough, the paranormal stuff began. My dad always worked nights, leaving just me and my mom in the house alone, but it no longer felt like we were alone. In the living room, we had one computer at the time, back when dial-up internet was still a thing. This was the family computer. My mom was on it one night, and I stood behind her and watched her as we spoke to each other. I then felt a hand grab me on my shoulder from behind. I turned around, thinking it was my dad home early because it felt so real, and there was no one there. My dad was still at work. Another night, we had an old sunroom that was my bedroom. It was the middle of the night, and I was asleep until I was woken up by my Furby toy on the shelf making noise. For those younglings, Furbies had a sensor and would talk if they sensed you in front of them. It made a few noises, then stopped. My bed was too far from it for it to sense me. I turned the lights on and walked over to the Furby to switch it off, but the switch was already off. Eventually, I began to have the same nightmare every single night. It always felt very vivid and real. The dream was me tied up with rope to an old bed with springs and no mattress by my arms and legs. It was my bedroom, but it was different. There was no light bulb, no electricity, and no other furniture in the room besides a bedside table next to me with an old-timey candle on a plate. It almost seemed like a different time period. I would be yanking my arms and legs, trying to flee, but I could never escape, no matter how hard I tried. I would wake up in a cold sweat every time. I had this same nightmare practically every single night, and sometimes it would result in 3 claw marks on my stomach. Didn't know this as a kid, but looking into it now, that's a sign of a demonic entity. It was so mentally exhausting I couldn't handle being alone in my room anymore. By this point, I was about 10 or 11. I was too scared to talk about it and tell my parents exactly what was going on. No one believes a little kid, I thought. But I would come crying to them and demand not to sleep in my bedroom anymore. Being around 11, most kids that age would love to have their own bedroom. But nope, not me. Screw that. So most nights I would sleep on a blow-up mattress in my parents' room on the floor. The nightmares only happened every other night instead of every night. I then started to sleepwalk. I don't have any memory of this, but my parents told me I used to sit up, scream, and cry hysterically while pointing at their bedroom window that faced a view of the front door and steps at ridiculous hours of the morning. I would scream my lungs out for them to shut the window, don't let him in. My mom was freaked out by this, as you would be, but my dad, being the grump he was, just said I was going through some phase and that I needed to let him sleep for work since he works most of the night. Over time, my mom would hear walking on the floorboards in the middle of the night while Dad was at work, but nobody else was in the house. The ceiling fan we had in the kitchen would turn itself on even when it was flicked off on the wall. We had lots of random things happening and signs of bad luck. My parents started to grow the family. My baby brother at the time was just starting to walk, but that beautiful memory was ruined. Shortly after learning to walk, out of nowhere he became bedridden. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat, and now he couldn't walk. It was so heartbreaking to see this happy baby's development ruined. We took him to the emergency. He no longer could move his spine. We went to doctor after doctor, running test after test, and none of them could figure out what was wrong with him. He seemed to have some sort of disease that they had never heard of, or so we thought. We had so much bad luck going on, and this to top it off had us all in just a horrible place. One doctor even said, "He's faking it. We did x-rays and there's nothing there." Finally, another doctor figured it out. My brother had gotten some sort of very rare cyst in his spine that they had never even seen before, only read about in textbooks. It was close to bursting and paralyzing him for life. After months of being in and out of hospital, we were finally starting to move on with our lives. Having acreage and being animal people, we built a chicken coop. We had it for a while. One morning, we woke up to feed the chickens, but none were in there. The chicken coop door was wide open. We always locked it with a bolt so no chickens could escape. Where are the chickens? There were at least 10. We found them. Well, part of them. All of the chicken heads were hacked off. No bodies were found, just the heads all laid out neatly in a straight line in our yard. That was the final straw. My dad stopped being stubborn and called the police. No suspects were found. Again, looking into this more, chicken heads are also a ritual belief for sacrificing. We struggled with money, but we finally moved out of the house. The nightmare stopped, and now it's been 10 plus years. The house has sat there empty with no residents ever since. It's now overgrown and decaying. Sometimes when I'm in the area, I feel drawn to drive past and look at it. Every so often I'll drive by and gaze at its decay. I've been on a few haunted investigations, but this is the one place I'm too scared to step foot in. It brings back a lot of trauma and pain. This is a true story, told to me by a friend about 5 years ago. Here's his paraphrased account. I'm a Marine, and at the time this occurred, I was 2 days out from ending my tour. Intel told us that a band of insurgents were holed up inside of a series of caves in Ad-Dor, Iraq. We split up and searched 2 deep caverns in groups of 3. Every corner turned came with it an unparalleled feeling of anxiety and dread, thinking that at any second one of us would step on an IED and end up blown to bits or trapped in rubble forever. Once we hit the 200-yard mark, my team lead got a call on his walkie-talkie that a man and woman bearing rifles were apprehended. It turned out that they weren't the insurgents we were after. They were found deep within the cave with guns and an old cuneiform stone tablet, seated around a small fire. They were detained and sent back to base in an armored vehicle, while I kept the tablet in my possession. Just before leaving the cave, our hearts nearly stopped when a blood-curdling screech emanated from deeper inside. It sounded like some sort of animal, and we didn't want to explore further. The front of the tablet was a transcription that I couldn't figure out. The flip side was a drawing. A snake head with horns, reptilian eyes, and serpent's tongue. Despite it being old and worn, the drawing was actually quite unnerving. I kept it with me as a souvenir. Before the couple were loaded into the truck, the woman looked at me and said, "You'd be wise to leave it behind." The following several nights, I had a barrage of horrific dreams where I brutally murdered my wife and daughter, and upon waking, I'd hear a voice damning me to hell. I brushed it off as stress, though oddly, my sense of smell was unusually strong. I could smell flowers 50 yards away. The dreams persisted after I got home. I showed my wife the tablet, and she kept it as a souvenir. She placed it in a small shelf we had on our bedroom wall. Not 2 days after getting back, I'd wake up in the middle of the night from those terrible dreams, only to find my wife out of bed. I'd discover her wandering aimlessly through the house, mumbling to herself and disoriented, like a somnambulant, a sleepwalker. This went on for 2 weeks, and then one night, it all came to a head. When I got out of the shower on this particular night, I walked into the bedroom to see my wife sitting on the edge of the bed, just staring at the tablet on the wall in a trance-like state. I spoke to her repeatedly, but was unable to get her to respond. She was just staring. I looked at her eyes, and sure enough, they were fixated on that tablet. I lightly grasped her chin and turned her head toward me. I shouldn't have done that. She gazed into my eyes with big, dilated pupils, rendering her irises fully black. She was gritting her teeth in a sort of angry, demonic scowl. I've never seen a look of true hatred until that moment. I could feel it penetrating my soul. Then, something magical and evil in equal measure occurred. She started whispering at me, stammering out what sounded like gibberish, or, more frighteningly, speaking in tongues. In that moment, her voice sounded like a man's, and the room began to fill up with a pungent, repugnant stench which was indescribable, like rotting garbage inside of a dumpster. The look in my wife's unblinking eyes sent chills down my spine and had all of my hairs standing at attention. I felt so vulnerable in that moment and subconsciously knew we'd been invaded by an evil force. She looked like she wanted to harm me. It was palpable. I could think of nothing else but to grab her by the hand, close my eyes, and pray the rosary over and over. Her palms were cold as ice and clutched so stiff in a vice grip that I'd not have been able to pry them open. As seconds passed, I finally heard my name, spoken in that sweet feminine voice I'd become accustomed to after all these years. "Adam? What just happened?" I asked her if she was okay and if anything was wrong. She replied, "I don't know. I got out of the tub and came in here, and I don't remember anything in between then and you coming in here. Was I talking?" "No, babe, you were just staring." Suddenly she spoke up, cutting me off. "Adam, please get rid of that tablet." "Why?" I asked. Her response made my blood run cold. "Because ever since you brought it home, I've been getting the feeling that I want to kill you and Lacey. Something evil is in our house." I grabbed it immediately and tossed it outside in the trash. The next day, I threw it in the river. Ever since that day, things have gone back to normal. I don't know what exactly happened to her that night, but she later claimed to have seen shadows moving around the house just after I got home, both day and night. One day, she said she saw a black shadowy mass hovering in the center of the living room, and she said, "I could feel it watching me, and worse, I felt that it hated me." I think something was inside of her that night, and I believe that had I kept that tablet, she might have went through with one of her feelings. I am a medical housekeeper in a local hospital. It's an old building opened in the 1950s. It's small but serves its purpose. I was hired at part-time on first shift and would typically clean two sections, the ICU and the L&D departments. It's a gross, sometimes depressing job, but it helps out with the bills. The other week, a girl who works on third was asking everyone if they wouldn't mind picking up her shift for the weekend. She's a sweet girl, and I could not understand why no one was willing to help her out for just one weekend. After 4 no's in a row, I told her I would take her shift for her. She was beyond excited. I was too in a way, because this wasn't my first rodeo on third shift, and it meant a little more extra cash on payday. I went on with my day, and the 4 people who originally turned her down kept warning me about Jane. I asked them who she was, and they all said I'd find out for myself. I just assumed it was another coworker who was gone before I got to work, and figured she was just a high-strung older lady who was just tired of working but had no choice in it. Saturday finally came, and I slept most of the day, getting my brain ready to switch to nocturnal mode. It had been a while, but I was excited for it. Something about working with no management breathing down my back for 8 hours is thrilling to think about. I left my house around 10 p.m. to get there early and relax some more while drinking my energy drink. When I got there 30 minutes later, I parked in my usual spot and looked around. Hospitals in general are pretty creepy, but no matter what, they're always creepy at night. I looked up and saw the first and second floors were dark, besides a few rooms where patients were still up with their TVs on and a small bedlight. The thing that caught my eye was on the 3rd floor. One window was lit up from the overhead light in the room. I remembered my manager telling me in my interview about the hospital having a big budget cut, and they cut the psych ward out that was on the 3rd floor and made it into offices and 2 computer labs. I had never gone up there because I had no reason to, but I figured it was just someone staying late to catch up on something. I went in and clocked in at 11. I was expecting to see 2 other people, but only one was there. She would be my supervisor for the night, Miss Kim. She's a great supervisor and worker, as well as being really laid back. She told me to cover the ER for the time being, and that if anything popped up, she would let me know. I got up there and did my thing. It was really empty for a Saturday night. I cleaned out the rooms and the nurse's station, and before I knew it, it was 2 a.m. I went downstairs, and Miss Kim was already there heating up some coffee and eating something. She said I could chill out for a bit with her, and later on she'd need me to go up to the 3rd floor and pull some trash that second shift didn't get around to. She was complaining about how they never go up there to do their jobs, and they would do anything else to get out of it. Typical trash talk every shift does to one another. I looked at the time and saw it was around 2:45, so I told her I was going outside to smoke a cigarette and then I would go up. I went outside and it was warm for February. I went to the smoking spot and looked up again. First floor and second floor lights were off, but the same room on the third floor was still lit up. I was still looking at it when I saw what looked like a silhouette looking back at me. I couldn't make out much, just a black mass in the shape of a person looking down at me. I finished my smoke and headed back in. Miss Kim was already gone and had left a sticky note on my cart telling me to go to the third floor and pull trash in the offices that weren't locked. In order to get up there, I would have to take 2 elevators, one from the basement where I was, the other in the front of the hospital. When I got to the second one and pushed 3, it jolted before starting to go up. For some reason, it stopped on the second floor. Looking back, it was probably a last-minute warning. When I got up there, everything felt so heavy. The air, the atmosphere, it was like I was hit with just an overwhelming amount of sadness. I cleared my throat and pushed my cart off and followed behind it. There had been no renovations done since it was turned into an office space. The rooms all still looked like they had when it was a psych ward. I went to the end of one side and pulled all the trash I could get to. I was looking around the rooms and some had what looked like scratches from nails on the walls. I could tell they tried to paint over them, but the paint wouldn't take to it. The 2 computer labs were day rooms once upon a time, old TV anchors still in the corners. I hated everything up there. All those mentally ill people feeling trapped and discarded by the outside world. When I got to the other side, I didn't see any light from any of the rooms. I carried on and got to 2 rooms before I heard someone humming. I tried to ignore it and hurried up a bit, knowing I'd be done soon and able to go back downstairs. Just as I was about to enter the next room, room 3, the light came on. I stood there for a second, looking in. It was a small room with a computer and desk. I didn't see a trash can, but I couldn't help but walk in. I went to the window and looked out. My eyes went to where I was standing outside smoking earlier, and then it hit me. This was the room. The room I had seen the silhouette looking down at me from the window. I began stepping back, but stopped suddenly when I saw a woman's reflection in the glass behind my own. I stood there frozen in place, looking at her. She made eye contact with me, and I heard a whisper in my ear. "I can't get out." I spun around quickly, but no one was there. I bolted out of the door and ran as fast as I could down the hall to the elevator. When I got there and pushed the button, I could hear what sounded like strong wind and a low growl turning to screaming coming towards me down the hallway. The second the doors opened, I ran inside and pushed the closed doors button. I turned back to the hallway only to come face to face with the old woman from room 3 standing right in front of me. She looked so confused and sad. As I stood there looking at her with more sympathy than fear, she whispered, "Help," as the doors started closing. I pushed the first floor button and the elevator dropped down. When I got off the elevator, I ran into Miss Kim. She looked at me like I was crazy and asked me what was wrong. I told her about the woman and about room 3. She smiled sadly and said, "I see you met Jane. She's been here for a long time. I didn't think she would do anything to you. Did she hurt you?" I said, "No, she didn't hurt me. She was just asking me for help." Miss Kim's eyes widened and she said, "Don't ever go back up there, even in the daylight. That wasn't Jane." I went home early that morning around 5 a.m. As I was walking through the parking lot to get to my car, I couldn't help myself and looked up one last time into room 3. There was no silhouette of a woman looking down at me. Instead, a dark and twisted, demon-looking creature was staring at me, clawing at the window. I came back the next night and parked in the front. I stayed in the ER all night that night. Occasionally to this day, if I walk past the elevator, I can feel a draft coming from the crack and hear a faint scream that I know is coming from room 3. I've been lurking here for a while and decided to share our experiences we had at a rental. First off, before we even moved in, the management had said there was a water heater leak in one of their properties, so we weren't going to be able to see a house we were interested in. Remember this tidbit. We went and saw a property and, after a few weeks, decided to put a deposit on it, but only if the homeowner put a toilet back in the basement. He agreed to this, but didn't do it. This plays a huge part in our experiences. We were cleaning the floors in the basement before we moved the furniture in because it was dirty. It smelled like death. We saw that there wasn't a P-trap on the pipe where the bathroom sink was supposed to be. We plugged this and soon the smell went away, or so we thought. Time goes by and weird things start occurring. My kids would say that they felt something or someone pushing them down the hallway. The feeling was a hand on their head or sometimes on their shoulders. I just brushed it off, but I did feel uneasy in the house as well. My second oldest, Amy, had started getting extreme pain throughout her body right after moving in. No one could help her. Then she started getting flashing lights and other scary vision problems. One night, she wakes me up saying she had the weirdest thing happen. None of the kids like sleeping alone, and this just made it worse. Amy was woken by her younger sister Jess standing in her doorway. Jess was sparkling in orange and purple color. Amy gets out of bed to see why Jess is up, in her room, and why she's sparkling. When Amy gets out of her bed, Jess runs into her own room. Amy quickly followed her, but when she reached Jess's room, Jess was squatting down in the doorway covering her eyes. When Amy reached down to see what was wrong with her younger sister and touched her shoulder, she disappeared. At that moment, Amy sees Jess fast asleep in her bed. Then the shadow man started appearing to the girls, laying in their beds, walking throughout the house and even outside of the house. I also felt something but wasn't positive what I was feeling. One day, we were sitting upstairs and heard a loud noise downstairs. I went to investigate and found a piece of plywood laying on the floor. Something had to have moved it as it was laying across the beams in the ceiling. I just told the kids it had to be mice. I knew better. A few days later, we're all downstairs. The dog was walking in between the kids' beanbag chairs in the entertainment center when out of nowhere she begins to whimper, pins her ears back, and squats, peeing uncontrollably. Something she had never done before. It looked as if something hurt her. Our dog hated going downstairs, too. She also hated a certain part of the backyard. Wouldn't go into it no matter what you'd do. She'd growl at my closet and would bark, chase, and scratch at something on my bedroom wall. We had the normal noises you'd expect, but we had some very odd things, too. On numerous nights, when just our TV was on, we'd see flashes coming from our adjacent kitchen. We ruled out anything electrical and neighbors being the source. It would shoot from one end to the other. I was skeptical and tried to chalk it up to anything else but the supernatural, but then I started to catch the shadow man in various places. My kids flat out refused to sleep in their own beds at this point, so I slept with them in the living room. A few nights were frightening. Amy would wake up screaming. I mean screaming like she was being tortured. I knew we had something bad in the house. Well, we found out we had a massive sewer gas leak and refused to live there anymore. I packed everyone up and we stayed in a hotel for a few days. When we returned, that's when it hit the fan for me. Supposedly the landlord fixed the issue, but we felt sick as soon as we went back in. I ended up in the ER and asked my son to take a pic of his costume. There was all this smoke above his head in his room. I asked him what it was, and he said there wasn't anything above him and doesn't know what showed up on the picture. We all meet up to go trick-or-treating, and when we got home, it was as if someone or something was punching me and the kids. I can't even describe the feeling of utter doom in that moment. We left and never went back. The story doesn't end here, though. Whatever was in that house attached itself to Amy. She was being tortured. While in the hotel, she was being attacked by something unseen. Something was telling her to harm herself. She was only 10. As I was driving them to a doctor's appointment, Jess was looking at her pictures and said, "Mom, that's the shadow man I was talking about." As I was driving, I just said, because I couldn't look. I kind of brushed it off until later that day as they were swimming. I was scrolling through her pics, and I saw it. She took a selfie and he was right next to her, looking at her. Other pictures taken at the hotel showed something floating above their heads as if a hand was coming out of nowhere, reaching down to them. It took about a month, but slowly it began to go away. Amy dealt with the possession for 3 straight days. No sleep and constantly being told lies, but we listened to Christian music, reading the Bible and praying out loud. I had to go back into the house to pack, and would have Christian music blaring and would recite certain verses, but there was definitely still a presence. It was evil. I had to have someone go in to remove something, and he ran out fast. I didn't tell him anything before or after he went in, but he was stressed out. He said it didn't feel right in there. And my friend who helped me for 3 hours said she felt pain in her chest and could feel something off in the house too. I chalked it all up to the gases at first, but when I saw the pictures and seeing Amy suffer for 3 straight nights, I couldn't deny there was something else going on. I shared this with the manager and she shared that the house that had a water heater leak was this house. She said something felt very off when she went downstairs to turn it off, and couldn't even do it. The lights were all flickering in the basement and only in the basement. She initially assumed that the water had hit the electrical, but it wasn't that high, and why only the basement? I always thought I'd be a strong Christian and tell it to go away in Jesus' name, but I was scared. It had me fooled it had more power than it did. On a side note, anything that was in that house seems to have an attachment to it. We can't use anything anyways because of the gases, but when the kids would grab something like a toy from the garage, weird things started up. So everything is still in the garage, waiting to be dumped. I was always skeptical before this happened to us, but now, it's all different. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had an encounter with something you believe to be demonic? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you have any stories you'd like to be narrated, be sure to send them in. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fearseekers. I'll see you in the next video.